Mattie, it is great to see you. What do you think is the most important thing to get done and to get into this stimulus as you listen to Jessica's description of all of the different measures?
Yeah, Jess really laid out that there's a lot of different things at play here, but here is really the landscape that we're working with. The CARES Act that was passed back in the spring, the assumption was that in July, we would be in a better circumstance, both from a public health perspective and as a result, a better economic perspective. We're not quite there yet, as we've seen infection rates being volatile across the country, and of course, an uneven reopening as states try to get a handle on how they can get back to business while the coronavirus is still a very big problem in some communities. So here's what Congress needs to do. Congress needs to offer economic certainty to the extent that they can while there is still a lot of public health uncertainty. So we've talked a lot about schools reopening. Of course, we're coming up on that deadline. The thing to keep in mind is that those are the big questions. The smaller questions of what communities can be doing to slow the spread of the virus is something we still need to stay very focused on. So things like washing your hands, social distancing, and wearing masks, if that could get consensus buy-in from across the country, that would make those bigger questions about how you open schools and how you get businesses reopened a lot more simple. But we're not quite at that first step yet. So Congress really has to hone in on how they can give certainty to American taxpayers, businesses, and workers as we move forward on some of these really important deadlines.
Okay, Mattie, we all know that what Congress should do and what Congress does are two separate things. So I'm curious. We know the administration wants a payroll tax cut. We know the Democrats want the restoration of the state and local tax deduction. Those two will clash and we'll get something. What is that child going to look like?
Yeah, fair point, Adam. So a couple of things to keep in mind here. One is that the CARES Act was a bipartisan bill. Both Democrats and Republicans support it, and that had a ton of payroll tax relief in it. Not a payroll tax cut, as the president's been talking about, but relief that allows liquidity for businesses as they try to get through this uncertain environment. I think that was smart policy, but it also shows that there are Democrat and Republican fingerprints on that payroll tax holiday. When it comes to the SALT deduction, we've talked about it a lot on air. I mean, this is a tax cut that goes primarily to high income earners in high tax states. It's not going to do much in the form of stimulus. So what Congress should be doing is looking at ways that if they're going to enact policies that affect the tax code, they should be broad-based changes that actually have a stimulative effect. Other efforts such as a tax credit to go on vacation, not going to have much of an impact given that people aren't going on vacation because of income problems. They're not going on vacation because they're not sure that it's safe. So as long as that public health safety question is out there, I return to the fact that Congress needs to be able to offer some certainty to Americans to make sure that as we move through these next couple weeks and months, at the very least, there's some stability there. I think that $600 plus up on the unemployment insurance benefit, that's really the question. There's been a lot of really great proposals out there to offer a bridge for people who are earning that extra $600 plus to getting them back to work. Ranking member on the Ways and Means Committee, Kevin Brady, has a proposal that would bonus out workers for that. Senator Portman has a proposal that would offer bonuses to that. I think that's where the rubber hits the road on the real world impact for taxpayers, but where also Congress could find consensus to make sure they're keeping American families whole as they really have a very uncertain landscape that they're facing.
Hey, Mattie, Rick Newman here.
Hey, Rick.
That enhanced unemployment, that enhanced unemployment, that's probably not going to be $600 in perpetuity per week. What is a reasonable way to phase that out? And what do you think a back to work incentive might look like? So that's one of the ideas, is you could perhaps combine a phase down in the enhanced unemployment with a back to work incentive. So what might that package actually look like?
So you had economists from both the Obama and Bush administrations saying in an op-ed a couple of weeks ago that a 600 plus up in perpetuity is bad for the economy. So it's bipartisan concern about keeping that $600 in place. The challenge with this, and the reason that this was a $600 flat increase, was because most UI systems can't handle anything more complex than that. So there's been a lot of ideas about trying to prorate this for the amount of money a worker was making before they went went on unemployment. Our state employment system simply can't handle that kind of work. So I do think the proposals that are out there that would allow for a worker to get called back to their job but still receive a week or two of unemployment benefits is probably the best way to go about it from a logistical perspective, but also from a personal finance perspective, so that these workers have a little bit of buffer as they try and get back to work. Because remember, a lot of workers aren't getting recalled back to 40 hours a week. They're getting recalled back to maybe 20, 34 hours. There still is a need for some kind of buffer there. The question of whether or not our states can administrate it is a whole different one entirely.
Mattie, what about the sort of corporate proposals that have been floated out there? What about a payroll tax cut? What about the big proposal that was floated on the cover of the Wall Street Journal today that has to do with tax credits? I wonder how palatable some of those proposals will be, given that there really does seem to be a bifurcation in suffering from this economic and health crisis, in that people who are most disadvantaged are suffering the most.
Yeah, and Julie, don't forget that the program that was passed in the CARES Act that was intended to help the small business component, so not big corporations, the PPP loan, I mean, that now has been chronicled as a bailout. I mean, it's been, everyone who's accepted it has been shamed for taking these loans. It seems you're darned if you do, darned if you don't, if you're a business in this environment. So I do agree with you, though, that certainly these circumstances have shown the difference between safety nets for small employers and large employers. When it comes to the tax code, my organization, NTU, has been talking about any changes in the tax code, in order for them to be stimulative, do have to be broad-based and not just targeted at specific industries. Because two reasons. One, politically, you're going to have the castigation that happened with the PPP loans and other areas where we've tried to support businesses, where it looks like cronyism and it looks like it's something that's going just to niche industries. But secondly, from a practical perspective, again, I get back to that point of Congress needing to offer certainty in very uncertain times. If they're continuing to carve out small components of the tax code for specific industries, that's a step backwards in trying to give a shot in the arm to the American economy that employers are looking for when they're trying to decide what their tax burden is going to look like throughout the rest of the year, which of course is going to be a big liability if they continue to have to suffer under constraints that don't allow them to get their consumer and customer bases back up to the baseline they expected.